What's up guys, back again with another video in the Java series. This time I'm going to teach you how to declare variables. Alright, so last time we made our first Java application and we just made a simple thing that outputs the message hello world into the console. I taught you some other basic stuff. So what I'm going to do here is create a new project. So go to File, New, Project. And we did this last time, I'm pretty sure, but it's good to, get the repetitiveness and get the practice down, assuming you're following me at least. And so click Create Project from Template, Command Line Application. So select that and click Next. Then give it a name. So we're going to call this project declaring. Actually, let's set it somewhere else. So this is where you choose where you want to put it. So I'm going to say Development Tutorials, and then right here you can put a slash, and that's going to be the name of the folder. So let's say we're going to call our project Declaring Variables Tutorial. Okay, so that's going to be the folder that our project is going to live inside of. So now we can just put the name right there. And so for this, for the base package, you can leave it blank if you want to, or you can put a package. And you'll be learning much more about packages later on. But packages, the common practice for packages is just to put your domain name. So let's say you're a business or you own a website or something like that, and you have a domain like codysimpson.com, then the common practice would be to do something like com.codysimpson, so just backwards basically. And not everyone has a website, obviously, most people don't, so you can just make something up like me.codysimpson or me.bob. But like I said, you can just leave it blank if you want to. So I'm going to put me.codysimpson because that's just what I usually do. It's not going to affect anything at this point, but it's just common practice, okay? Anyway, so let's click Finish and click Create to create a new project, and then click this window if you already have a project open. And here we go. So our project is now being generated, and so we can open up the project here, and we can see our main class along with some basic template code here, okay? So yeah, so this may look foreign to you still, even though we have done one episode so far. Just to recap, this is the main class here. We're going to be learning about classes later, and then inside of the class we have something called the main method, and every program needs a main method to be able to run. This is called the entry point to your program. So whenever the Java virtual machine starts running your code, it looks for the main method to know where to begin, right? So this is where we're going to start putting our code here, okay? So let's go inside of here. So what I'm going to show you first is how to make a comment, because those are very important to making programs and planning them out and explaining how your programs work. So let's say we want to leave a message in our program that doesn't affect our code, or how the program runs rather. So we can do two types of comments. We have a / comment, which is a single line comment, and then anything that follows that, the Java compiler will ignore when you run the program, okay? So this won't affect our program in any way. It's just basically a way for us to leave a message within our program. And you're going to see me use comments very often to explain what I'm doing, just to label the code that I'm using. And so there's a second type of comment called a multi-line comment. So you can do a slash and then a star or a pound and then press enter, and then anything in between these two thingies here will be a comment. So you can have multiple lines. So we could have many different lines, and then anything in between that is a comment, and it's grayed out just so that you know it's a comment, right? So since this episode is going to be about declaring variables, we'll just have a comment at the top here that says declaring variables. Alright, so pretty simple, right? So a variable on the most basic level is an alias you can use to hold a piece of data, aka a name that you can use to hold a piece of data. So let's say that you want to store someone's age, right? So what you can do is create an age variable, so it's called age, and then assign the age of the person that you want to store the age for. So then every time you want to get that person's age, all you have to do is reference the variable name of age, and then you can use it in your program. And that may sound confusing, but I'm going to give you plenty of examples. Do not worry about that. So first, let me go ahead and show you the structure of a variable. What is the structure of any variable that you ever want to create? So first, we're going to do the type. That's the first thing you need to have for a variable. So that's the data type. And the next episode, we're going to go over all the data types, all the basic primitive data types for a variable in Java. And then next you need a name or an identifier. So this is where you're going to use to reference the variable, how to use it. And then you're going to have an equal sign, and then after the equal sign you're going to have what you want to store inside the variable, so data. Okay, so this is how you create a variable. And then don't forget your semicolon. You need a semicolon on the end of every statement pretty much in Java. And so let's say that we want to have a variable here. Let's create our first variable. So we'll do integer brain size, so that's the size of my brain, is equal to 1000. So now what we have done here is created a integer variable, and an integer is just a data type that holds a number, a whole number, and then we have the name of the variable, or the identifier, which is brain size, and then equals, and then 1000. So what we have done here is created a variable called brain size that holds a number that holds the number of 1000. So now every time we call brain size within our program, that's going to give us the value stored in that variable, which in this case is 1000. So let's say that we want to print out, my brain size. We can do system.out.println, and this is what I showed you last episode when we printed out hello world into the console. So this is just a method here that you can use to print out messages to the console, the program console, okay? So let's say that we want to print out our brain size. We can just type brain size, and as you can see, IntelliJ is already giving us suggestions for what it wants us to put inside of here, and it automatically recognizes that we have created a variable called brain size. And so if you want to use this, you can press tab, and then it puts the brain size variable inside of here, okay? So now, if we run this, let's see what happens. So click the little run button up here, and now it's building the application, compiling it into bytecode, and then running it. And here we go. So we get 1000 into the console down here. It may look a little small, but there it says 1000. So that's how the variable works. On the most basic level, it's literally just a name that stores a value. And there's different types of values that we can store, and that depends on the data type that we're using, right? And we're going to learn about data types in the next episode, like I said before, but the most basic and most common data type is an integer, who just stores a whole number. So we don't have to create every variable with the same data type of integer, right? Like I said 2 seconds ago, there's different types of data types. So how can we create different variables of different data types? Let me give you some more examples here. So let's say we want to hold a decimal number, or a number that has a decimal in it. So for that, we would use a double. So that's the data type. So first we got to provide the type, right? So double is a data type that allows us to use a number with a decimal point in it, a floating point number as it's called. And then we can give it a name of test score, and then we can give it a value of 10. So let's say I did very bad on a test. So you can create a variable called test score and then store the value of 10.0 in the test, or in the test score variable, right? So let's create another variable, boolean is cool is equal to true, and let's have another one. Let's call it string name is equal to Cody. So these are 2 other foreign data types that you might not be aware of, but boolean is a data type that allows you to store a true or false value into a variable. In this case, we're storing true because I am cool. And then we have a second one, or a third one rather, called name, that stores a string. So we have created a string variable called name that stores the value of Cody. So let's try printing these out just for testing, right? So you don't have to type system.out.println every time. You can also do the shortcut here called sout, and then IntelliJ automatically completes it for you. So if we want to, we can do something like this. We can do name, and then every time we run this program, it's just going to take the name, or the value stored in the name variable, and then print it out into the console, okay? So let's click run here. And now into the console, we can see that it says 1000 because we still have this variable printing out here called brain size. And then we have Cody because we're printing out the string variable into the console here. So let's see if we can add some more stuff to make it a little more complex. So we can do plus sign. So that's called concatenation, but we'll learn about that later. And then we can have a comma, and we can say Cody, comma, is he cool? Question mark, and then we'll add a space and another plus, and then we can add another variable if we want to, so is cool. So now what this will do is say it'll print out the name of the person stored in this variable here, and then it will add on to that string, comma, is he cool, space, and then it'll also add on the value stored in this is cool boolean variable here. So let's run this and see what happens. So in this case, we get Cody, comma, is he cool, and then true. Because in this is cool variable, we have the value of true, and then again in this name variable, we have the value of Cody. So if you want to, let's create a variable called integer bob, and you don't actually have to give it the data. This is actually optional. You can assign it data later on if you want to. So let's say that you want to have a variable, but you don't want to give it a value right away. You can just create the variable and then assign it a value whenever you feel that it's ready to have that value, right? So in this case, we have integer bob, so we've created a new bob variable. And then later on in our program, we can do bob is equal to, and then give it a value of, let's say, 45. So that's perfectly valid. You can reassign in initialize variables here. So in this case, we never initialized the variable because we never gave it an initial value of 45. We just gave it nothing. So we're creating the variable, but we're not initializing it, right? And then later on, we finally give it a initial value just by assigning it, right? And so you got to be careful though, because if we try printing out this bob variable in between those two statements, I want you to guess what's going to happen. So in this case, IntelliJ actually does kind of try and tell you what's going to happen. It says variable Bob might not have been initialized. And that's because if you think about it, it makes perfect sense because Bob here was never given a number as its value, right? So if we try printing out Bob, it doesn't know what to display to the console because Bob has no value. So let's try running this and see what happens. In this case, we do get an error. It says Java variable Bob might not have been initialized. So we can't even compile the program because it knows that something is off here, right? So yeah, just be very careful about that. Make sure not to use a variable before you give it an initial value. But of course you can do this. You can cut this, so Control X, and then move it down here. And that's perfectly valid because Bob, at this point in time, does have a value. Remember, a program runs line by line pretty much, right? There's going to be more complex stuff we're going to learn about where the program can jump around and stuff, but generally speaking, a program runs line by line. So it starts here. These don't actually run anything because they're comments. Then it goes here, and then line 10 declares a new variable. Then it goes to the next one. Bob is equal to 45, it runs that, and then finally it goes to 14. So it's line by line, just don't forget that. So it's a very logical step, execution set of steps or whatever. So this is perfectly valid. So if you run this, it should say 45 into the console here. And there we go, so we get 45. So let's say that in some point in our program we want to give Bob a new value. So let's say, let's actually get rid of this here. Let's make a new integer, or a new variable rather. And we're going to make a double variable. So a double, if you remember, is a variable, a data type that stores a floating point number or a number capable of having decimals, right? So a double, we'll call it new test score or new score is equal to, and we're going to say 56. So we got a 56 on the test. So 56.0 because it's a double. And then let's say that some point in our program, we'll pretend that the person, Bob takes, let's say Bob retakes his test. So after he takes his test, he's going to get a new score. So what we can do here is reassign the value stored in this variable. So new score is equal to 100. So let's say he got a perfect score on the test. We can then reassign the new score variable to hold a new value of 100. So this original value here is discarded and replaced with 100.0. So now if we print this out, we'll get new score. It should print out 100 into the console. So let's try running this now. And there we go, so we get 100. And again, just to prove the point, let's take this and put it here. So in between here and the reassignment, it should be 56, right? Because it hasn't been reassigned yet. So it should print out 56 into the console, and then it should print out 100 because after that, it's been reassigned. So let's just run this now. And there we go. So we get 56 and 100 into the console. So yeah, some basic stuff, but that's how you reassign a variable. So you can do that as many times as you want. And yeah. So there's some other cool tricks that you can do. So let's say that you have the need for multiple variables of the same data type. So let's say we need 3 integers, right? So what we can do is have those 3 integers declared on one line. So normally, let's say we need an x, y, and z integer. So we can do integer x, integer y, and integer z. So that's one way to do it, and that's perfectly valid. But a shorter way to do that would actually be to do integer x, comma, integer y, and integer z, just like that. And that's actually perfectly valid, but it is warning us here if we hover over this. It says variable x is already defined in the scope, and that's because we have already declared a variable of x, y, and z within this scope here, and we're going to learn about scope later. But the point is that you can't have 2 variables of the same name, at least in this situation. So we can get rid of this, and now the warnings go away. So we get x, y, and z. And so that's perfectly valid. It's the exact same thing as what we did before, except that we're, shortening it by putting it all on one line, which is pretty cool. So then we can assign them if we want to. So we can do x is equal to 4, y is equal to 3, and then z is equal to 3 or something like that, right? So yeah, that's how you can do that. But let's say that we want to give them initial values. So let's say we want to give x a value of 4, y a value of 3, and then z a value of 1. That's perfectly valid. And that's another way to do that. But I don't really think that most people do this because it's a little confusing. It's actually much more clear, at least in my opinion, if you have it all on different lines. It's just easier to read in my opinion. But you may see this in programs sometimes and you can do it yourself. It's perfectly valid. And so you can also leave out, any of them if you want to. So you can initialize only the ones that you want to initialize. You don't have to initialize all of them if you don't want to. And let me give you one more example. So we have... let's do integer Joe is equal to 5, Randy is equal to 7, Bill, we're going to leave him unassigned, and then Henry is equal to 10. So what that is going to do is declare 4 variables of the data type integer and then give them all initial values except for Bill. So we just got to remember not to use Bill in any way, like print it out, for example, because Bill does not have a initial value, okay? But the other ones do. Okay, so we're almost done here. I just want to teach you about how to name variables properly. There's 2 things you really want to follow. There's naming rules and then naming conventions. Rules are something that you must follow because the Java language, wants you to do stuff a certain way, so you need to follow that or it won't work. And then conventions are just common practice that most developers follow. And both are recommended because it's just a proper way of doing things in the developer community, okay? So first let's talk about the rules. What are the rules for naming a variable? So whenever you name a variable, make sure not to use a reserved Java language keyword. So for example, we have these keywords here, public, static, and void. We cannot create a variable of the name static, void, or public, or anything like that, or even class. Those are all reserved keywords. So let's say we want to create a variable integer and we call it static. That is not possible because static it has a specific use within the Java language, so it gets confused. So to avoid confusion, you cannot create a variable of that same name because it has a specific purpose within the Java language, like I said. So in this case, if we do static is equal to 5, that is invalid. So if we run this, let's see what happens. And it doesn't even let you run it because it knows that what you're doing is really not good. So yeah, that's for any of the keywords. So integer, class. Anyway, so yeah, just make sure not to use any of the reserved Java keywords because, of course, that would just lead to confusion and it doesn't work. So the second rule that you need to follow is that variables can consist of letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. So let me type this out for you. So letters, digits, underscores, and dollar sign. So that's what a variable can consist of. But they cannot start with a digit or number. So you can create a variable that has any of these things, but it cannot start with a digit. That's the naming rules that you need to follow, the second naming rule that you need to follow, besides using keywords and all that. So let's give you some examples here. So let's say we have an integer that stores the stock price of the Tesla stock. So we can start it with a $, TSLA is equal to 450. That's actually perfectly valid because that's what the rules here say. We can use letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs, and there's nothing that says we cannot use a $sign as the starting character for a variable name, the identifier. And so let's give some more examples. So integer underscore cheese. So you can start a variable with the name of underscore cheese, and then you can have another variable that has numbers inside of it. So this is a perfectly valid name. If you're not insane, you probably wouldn't use a name like this. So it's just an example, obviously. So, and then we'll have another one. So integer wicked underscore wiener. So the wicked wiener, it has a underscore inside of it, and that's perfectly valid because, again, it says you can use underscores inside of here. So here's some examples of invalid names. So we can do integer 123 poop, and this is invalid because a variable identifier cannot start with a number or a digit. That's invalid. And then another invalid one would be integer wow backtick whatever, and that's invalid because this backtick here is not a valid identifier character that you can use, right? Only letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. So just make sure you follow that basic rule and you should be fine. And yeah, so let's get on to the naming conventions, which are, again, conventions, common practice among the community. Okay, so the most important naming convention for variables, or at least for these basic primitive variables that we're working with here, is to use camel case. And camel case is a naming convention for if you have multiple words within a variable name. So for example, let's say we have a variable called I like potatoes. So camel case would be to do I like potatoes. So hopefully you can notice the pattern here, but this pretty much means that if the variable consists of multiple words, start the first word with lowercase, and then each of the following words start with uppercase letters, right? So let me give you another example. So let's say integer that moment when you spill hot sauce on your floor. So you can probably see the pattern more clearly now because we have more words. So the first word starts with a lowercase first letter, and then each of the following words have uppercase letters for the first character. So that's camel case, okay? So it's like the humps of a camel, pretty much. So you just want to follow that when making, basic local variables. And there's different types of variables. There's constant variables. There's reference variables. There's even class names. That's not a variable, but there's class names. There's different conventions for different stuff is what I'm trying to say. And this is the most basic convention that you'll learn, the first one. And as you watch this series, you'll learn different conventions for naming different things, the proper way to do things, okay? So we'll have another one. So you are cute, and that's a perfect camel case named variable. So just to reiterate, this is just a recommendation. It's just a convention. You do not have to follow it. You can do whatever you want. The ones that you do have to follow are the rules that I told you here. So it cannot be using a keyword as its name. So we cannot have, example, integer public. That's invalid because public is a Java reserved keyword. And then we cannot start our variable names with a digit or a number, okay? Alright, so that was a little bit of a long episode, but hopefully you understood this pretty well. I just gave you a really good overview of variables, I hope. And so now you know how to create variables, so it's just following the layout of the type, the identifier, or the name, and then you can optionally provide the data that the variable is going to hold. In the next episode, we're going to be learning about the different data types that we can use to create different variables of different types. And yeah, so that's how you create variables, that's how you initialize variables, that's how you reassign variables, that's how you name variables using rules and conventions. And if you have any questions at all, you can leave a question in the comment section below. Also, you can join our Discord community. We have a big Discord community of about, I think, 2,000 members. So you can join that, ask for help on your programming stuff, you can ask for guidance, get some friends, whatever you want to do. So make sure you join that. There's a link for that in the description below. Also, what I'll do is leave a link in the description below for the code for this episode. So what I'll do here for every episode, or at least most episodes, is leave a link, and this will take you to the code for the episode. So it's going to have a bunch of explanations in comment form, so you can go through the concepts again in text form in case that's more clear for you. And you can even bookmark this in case you ever want to come back to it, in case you want to, reread on the concepts and understand them again. Just update your brain basically. And yeah, so that'll be in the description below, so check it out. And that'll be for every episode. And yeah, one more thing you can do is you can click the join button below this video. You can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents, $5 or $10 a month, and you can get some cool perks like early access to all of my new videos. You can get, so as you can see, some of these people have the YouTube member rank, and if you become a member, you can get this rank too, so you can feel extra special and all that. And also you can see yourself on the screen like you see right now. So thanks to all of you who have been supporting me so far. I appreciate the support, and I will continue to make more videos for you guys. Alright, so that's it for this video. If you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe, and peace.